In this video, we'll be learning how to factor a trinomial. A trinomial is a three-termed polynomial, which is ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just numbers. Tri meaning three, that means I have three terms, three terms in this polynomial. Now the next thing we need to understand is what factoring is. And a lot of people don't tell you what the point of factoring is. Well, factoring takes me from many terms to one term. Well, what is a term? A term is something that is separated by pluses and minuses. So what we have here is three terms. And we want to change those three terms into one term, which means that everything's going to be multiplying or dividing in this expression. So how do we get from many terms to one term? We factor. And usually for a trinomial, we factor with two brackets. And how would I get from one term to many terms? Well, I would expand. So we can always check if we got the correct factoring by expanding the brackets and seeing if we get back what we had in the beginning. And as you can see here, I have a bracket multiplied by another bracket, which means that everything is multiplying. Even if there are pluses and minuses inside of the bracket, they are still multiplying and giving me one term. And why would I want to do that? Because multiplying and dividing is a lot simpler to work with than adding and subtracting in algebra. Now we're going to reverse engineer a method to factor that is based in understanding, not in memorization. We don't want to learn how to memorize rules to get an answer, because then we haven't learned anything and our memories will fail us when it comes to a test or even an exam in a few months or years' time. We want to understand things because that will lead to us having knowledge for the rest of our lives. So, if I'm trying to factor this, I've created a method in which we can use expanding, because expanding is the opposite of factoring. And if we can understand how to do the opposite of expanding, we can factor. So when I expand a bracket like this, the first two terms would multiply together and give me x squared. That would be x and x. Those are my only two options. X and x would multiply together and give me x squared. Well, what about the plus 7 on the end? Well, 7 is a prime number, so the only factors would be 1 and 7, or minus 1 and minus 7. So let's try 1 and 7 and see what happens. Okay, so 7 times 1 would give me 7. That is the only option I have other than using a negative also. But now we want to find out what is the middle term. And how do I find out what is the middle term? Well, first thing we multiply is x and x. That will give me x squared. Then we multiply the inner terms, which would give me 7x, and I'm going to multiply them here, 7x, and the last two terms, which will just give me 1x or just x. Together I add up those terms and they will give me 8x, just like I was expanding. So if we can complete this diagram on the right, and I get 8x at the bottom, and these two factors are 7 and 1, and they make 7, I have my bracket. And where does my bracket come from? There and there. And we can see that our bracket is done. Our two brackets are done, and I have one term. Okay, let's try another one. Here I'm going to put this into two brackets. The first thing I should ever check for when I am doing factoring is a common factor. But there is no common factor here. And if you want to see how to use common factor, please check out my other video. So I have x squared. Let's use our diagram. In order to get x squared, I need x and x. That would give me x squared. So these will be my first two terms. And then I need the factors of negative 12. Well, if it's a negative number, that means one of the factors should be negative, like negative 4 times positive 3. But what do I need out in the end is positive 4x when I multiply out to get my negative term, my middle term. So now I want to choose the correct factors. Now 4 and 3 would not give me 4x in any way, but 6 and 2 would, because if I have a positive 6 and a negative 2, that could give me 4x. So if I have a 6 and a 2, and if the 6 was a positive number and the 2 was a negative number, let's see how that would multiply out. This would give me 6x, this would give me negative 2x, and together I have positive 4x. So I would have x plus 6, x minus 2, and there I have factored. If you ever want to check your factoring, you could always expand. X times x makes x squared. Then minus 6 times minus 2 will give me negative 12. And now the inner terms, the ones I've been working on, is 6 times x, which will give me positive 6x, and x times negative 2, which will give me negative 2x, and added together will give me 4x. I was saying before this that every time we factor, we should look for a common factor first. And that is exactly what I have here. I can see that there is a common factor of 5 that I can take out from each bracket. So what I have here then would be left, 5 would be outside the bracket, v squared minus 6v plus 8. And now I can factor what is inside this bracket. The 5 cannot just disappear, so we need to have the 5 there. But I know that this bracket can be factored into 2 more brackets. So let's use our diagram to check. So I'm just dealing with what is inside here. That is all I'm dealing with. So v squared comes from v times v. That would go here. And then I need the factors of 8. That would give me minus 6. Well, I could, and they both have to have the same sign in order to get a positive 8 out. Well, the factors of 8 are 8 and 1, and 2 and 4. So the only way I would be able to get negative 6 is if I had 4 times 2, where both of them are negative. Let's see if that works out. I would get negative 4v, I'd get negative 2v, and together I get negative 6v. So my bracket is v minus 4, v minus 2, and I have factored. I could always expand this out, and remember, expanding for multiplication can happen in any order. So I can multiply the 5 in first and then multiply everything to the next bracket, or I could multiply the bracket out there, v squared, and then minus 2v minus 4v makes minus 6v, and finally minus 4 times negative 8, minus 4 times negative 2 gives me positive 8. And there you have it, I have factored. And lastly, this is a more challenging example because of the number 2 in front. There is a 2 in front there, so we have to take that into account when we are doing the diagram on the right. Well, we stick to our method. We know that I have 2 brackets. The first 2 terms is 2n and n, because those are the only 2 terms that could give me 2n squared if I multiplied them together. Let's try negative 9. Well, I have a negative 9, so I'm going to have either 9 and 1 or 3 and 3, but one of them has to be negative, so 3 and negative 3. Now we can put those values in and see how they work. Often when it becomes more difficult, it's trial and error. So I'll have 3 and 3, and I have to choose one to be negative. Now we can, without putting the negative in, we can try and test it out. We can multiply there, and that would make 6n, and we can multiply there, and that would make 3n. And what do I want out? I want a positive 3n, which means that this one should be positive to get a positive 6n, and this one should be negative, to get a negative 3n. And there I have my two brackets. 2n minus 3, n plus 3. Remember, expand if you want to check that you got the final answer. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to solve them. If you want to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, please check out the links in the description.